If I was a mind vampire, I would compel you to read Carrion Comfort by Dan Simmons. What's going on, YouTube? Michael R. Schulteis here, author of the Rostaval Saga, which you can see, as always, on the shelf behind me. Today I'm coming at you with my review of Carrion Comfort by Dan Simmons. Bit of a theme on this channel, you might have noticed. Oh man, this book is so awesome. I have so much to share with you about this. Let's dig right in, starting with what's the book about? So the premise of this one is really fascinating. There are people who are mind vampires, and they can control people with their minds and even take power from them and extend their lives. So they really do merit the title of mind vampires. And we get a group of characters who are these mind vampires, and then another group who find out about the existence of the mind vampires and are trying to hunt them down. It's a simple premise, but what Dan Simmons does with it is so many levels of genius. I don't know where to start, except that I do. Let's talk some characters. This is a character-driven story. It is so great. So we get some sympathetic characters who are the people who are trying to track down the mind vampires. I'll talk about three briefly. So there's a psychiatrist, Saul Lasky is his name, and he is a survivor of the Holocaust. You have to remember, this is a novel that was written in the 80s, so it's in the 80s, and then there's also a set of flashbacks to when he was a much younger man in the camps in occupied Poland. And it gets really grim with the story of this incredible character. How he survives a literal death camp. And there are some parts of his story that will really grab hold of you and may haunt you a little bit. But the amazing thing is how Dan Simmons brings this guy to life and gives you this character who has a lot of trauma in his backstory. And he's trying to hunt down an SS officer who was in one of the camps that he was in. And the SS officer is, as you might have guessed, a mind vampire. The whole backstory with the two of them is very compelling. It is very grim, but it's also very fascinating. And it makes for an incredible dynamic just right there. There's this guy trying to, after decades, hunt down this Nazi who got away. Didn't die in the 40s. Found a new life in America, actually. So Saul Lasky is a character who I found myself totally rooting for, and he is just fantastic in every way. Then there's a young woman, Natalie Preston is her name, and she gets involved in the whole thing because her father is murdered by one of these as a consequence of being used by a mind vampire. And so she's out to try to figure out what happened and gets pulled into the whole thing. And she is very sympathetic. And again, I think the combination of, on the one hand, she's very vulnerable early on because this whole thing has happened to her, upended her whole world. But I think you can't not love her character arc. And I don't want to say too much because I don't want to give away any spoilers, but oh man, this is one of the best characters I think I've ever read. And then there's Sheriff Bobby Joe Gentry. He is a Southern sheriff who kind of has a bit of a good old boy vibe, but he's shockingly smart. Like this is the thing where Dan Simmons will subvert your expectations a little bit, actually more than a little bit, because this sheriff is actually really sharp, really well read, gets involved in the effort to take down the mind vampires. And again, another just an absolutely stellar top tier character performance. So these three, if you can't tell, I'm a massive fan of all three of these characters. They're not the only point of view characters that we get. There are points of view that we get from the mind vampires too. And this is where the novel, I think, acquires a whole new level of genius. Because Dan Simmons takes you into the minds of these extraordinarily disturbed, predatory, psychopathic pieces of crap. And he makes them extremely compelling characters. They are. They're terrible, but they're really, really compelling. So there's a producer, a movie producer, Tony Herod, who is a sexual predator. Let's just call it what it is. He is a massive creep. He is a terrible, terrible, terrible person. And while I didn't find it at all comfortable to be looking at his point of view during significant parts of the story, he is a very well-drawn predator who has his own complexities and his own shocking insecurities. I think that aspect of it was particularly well done. And then we get the point of view character who I think is one of the greatest aspects of Dan Simmons' genius that I have ever seen. And I'm quite a Dan Simmons fan, if I do say so myself. So this character, her name is Melanie Fuller, and she is from the antebellum American South. Yes, a planter family. Psychic vampire, has been around for a long time. Bug-shagging nuts. Absolutely crazy. Terrible. And she's the only first-person perspective we get. It's a fascinating narrative choice. And Dan Simmons pulls it off. He makes you see the world through the eyes of this completely crazy, bug-shagging nuts character. So the characters, for me, are some of the best that I think I've ever read in any book ever. And I would say on the strength of the characters alone, you should read this book. But I'm not done. Let's talk about the plot. The plot is just chef's kiss perfect. Multiple timelines. You get, like I mentioned, you get some of the backstory for Mr. Saul Lasky. He was a survivor of the Final Solution in occupied Poland, so you get some of that. It is very grim. You are going to feel it. And then you get their present. And it's interesting because Dan Simmons ties in real world history, and he does it very, very well. Not only with the Second World War, but some other more recent history as well. All of these aspects of the novel are just so fascinating. And I think I find the thing that just takes my breath away is how he can give you parts of a novel which are a bit more, not slow burn, but they're trying to figure things out, and there's these mysteries they're trying to unravel. Some of the characters have to sort of figure out what's going on, be brought up to speed. There's parts that are slower. There's some flashbacks, and then there are parts where you get into the cat and mouse games, and you get to some action sequences. It can be shockingly fast paced, and it all works. All of the pacing is just so brilliant, and it builds up to this finale that is just jaw-dropping. So the plot, not only do we have amazing characters, we have an amazing story. The plot is incredible. The pacing is incredible. So let's just cut to the chase here. This book is 5 out of 5 stars for me. Hands down, breaking the scale here. This is one of my new favorite books of all time. With that said, who is this book for and who is it not for? Well, if you're a Dan Simmons fan, go read this book already if you haven't yet. This may be not only one of your new favorite Dan Simmons novels, if you've enjoyed him in the past and you haven't read this book for some reason. It may become one of your top favorite novels of all time. It's certainly one of mine. And I'm going to say probably even top 5. And that is really saying something for me. I think if you like suspense novels and you don't mind some horror, this is not gross out horror. This is more psychological horror. If that kind of thing appeals to you, I think you're going to love this novel. With that said, who is this novel not for? Well, if you're not a Dan Simmons fan, this novel's probably not for you. If you don't like suspense, if you don't like some creepy aspects, it's more creepy than spooky. If that kind of thing rubs you the wrong way, not a novel for you. I mentioned before, I'm going to just touch it on again, there is some seriously disturbing content in this novel. It is a very frank, you will feel like you are in that death camp with a young Saul Lasky. It is not for the faint of heart, and I'm going to say, if facing these kinds of unpleasant realities of humanity, of just the man's inhumanity to man, that may not be what you're looking for, and that's okay. I'm not faulting anybody who doesn't want to explore that in fiction. To me, that's a large part of what I live for in fiction. But not everybody wants to confront that in fiction, and I understand that. I'll mention, too, there's some I mentioned there's one of the characters, one of the mind vampires is a sexual predator. There is some stuff there pertaining to sexual assault, but I am just going to say, warn you right now, if that is a big no-go zone for you with regards to what you want to read about, I'm just going to advise you compassionately to give this novel a pass for that reason. Now, with all of that said, wrap this all up here. If Carrion Comfort by Dan Simmons sounds like just what you're looking for, just the kind of suspense novel that you're looking for, and a mind vampire is not controlling you and making you say that, then go check it out. I'll put the link down below. As always, I want to thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll hope to see you on the next one.